Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode, who only surrendered because he had nothing left to fight with,
is the first kill, and it will not be the last.
The German euthanasia program begins.
Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Jenny. Last episode, Warsaw fell, September 27th, after 27 days of siege, 40,000 civilian casualties, and a defense that held out against everything Germany could throw at it. The fortress of Modlin surrendered the next day. Germany and the Soviet Union signed the paperwork dividing Poland between them. Estonia was forced to accept Soviet military bases on its soil, and Hitler told his generals to start planning the invasion of France.
And I'm Justin. This week, September 29th through October 5th, we close the chapter on Poland's military resistance entirely. There is still fighting, and there will be pockets of resistance for years, but the organized campaign ends this week with one final extraordinary battle. We'll also hear Churchill give one of his most famous radio addresses, watch a German warship begin a hunt across the South Atlantic, see the darkest possible evidence of where Nazi policy is heading, and end with Hitler holding a victory parade through a city he spent a month destroying. This is a heavy episode, so let's get into it. On Friday, September 29th, at 5 in the morning in Moscow, after much diplomatic haggling, interrupted by a state banquet at the Kremlin and a visit to the Bolshoi Theater to see Swan Lake, Germany and the Soviet Union sign what they call the German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty. Molotov and Ribbentrop are the signatories. The public clauses settle the boundaries of the former Polish state, in quotes. The secret clauses give the Soviet Union a free hand in the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, while Germany receives the province of Lublin and the whole of Warsaw.
To understand the scale of what's just been divided up, Germany annexes Danzig and a swath of western Poland totaling about 32,000 square miles, roughly the size of South Carolina, and incorporates it directly into the Reich. The remaining German-controlled territory, about 39,000 square miles of central Poland, think of it as roughly the size of Kentucky, becomes something called the Generalgouvernement, a German-administered territory that is explicitly not part of the Reich but is under total German control. The Soviet Union takes the eastern third of Poland, which is about 77 square miles, roughly the size of Nebraska, with a population of 13 million people. Lithuania and Slovakia receive small pieces on the edges, but Poland, as it existed on September 1st, completely gone.
Also on September 29th, Hitler issues a repatriation order for the 86,000 ethnic Germans living in Estonia and Latvia. He knows, because the secret protocol gave Stalin a free hand there, that the Soviet Union is about to swallow those countries. He is moving German civilians out before that happens. It is an act of acknowledgement that the Soviets are about to eliminate two independent nations. Germany has agreed to let it happen in exchange for Western Poland. The Soviet newspaper Pravda that day announces the German-Soviet friendship is now established forever.
Meanwhile, in Poland, fighting continues, because Poland has not simply accepted its fate. On September 29th and 30th, Polish forces are still engaging the Red Army in battles around Parchev, a town in eastern central Poland, about 100 miles southeast of Warsaw, in the zone that was supposed to have already been handed over to the Soviets. These are the remnants of units that refused to stop. The battles end on September 30th, with Polish forces managing localized successes against Soviet forces. This battle was small, strategically meaningless, and in character for the Polish armed resistance.
On October 2nd, the Hel Peninsula finally surrenders. Hel is a narrow strip of land, imagine a very long, thin sandbar about 20 miles long and barely half a mile wide at its widest, that juts out into the Baltic Sea from the northern Polish coast. It points roughly towards Sweden. The peninsula sits just west of Danzig. The Polish Navy has been using it as a defensive outpost since day one of the invasion, with its guns covering the approaches to the harbor. Rear Admiral Unrug and 5,000 men held the peninsula for over a month under naval bombardment, air attack, and artillery fire. They finally capitulate on October 2nd. Another month of impossible resistance is now over.
And then there's the Battle of the Kocksk. Kocksk is a small town in east-central Poland, about 120 miles southeast of Warsaw. By early October, an independent Polish operational group under General Franciszek Kleberg, soldiers who had been fighting their way across the country since September 1st, gathering stragglers, refusing to surrender. They make a final stand there against the German 10th Army. The battle begins on October 2nd and runs for 3 days.
On October 5th, the very last day our episode covers, the Battle of Kocksk ends. Kleberg's forces inflict serious casualties on the Germans and hold their own tactically, but they are out of ammunition and food. Kleberg surrenders on his own terms, negotiating the treatment of his men before laying down arms. This is the last organized military action of the Polish September campaign. The invasion of Poland began on September 1st, and it ends here, 35 days later, with a general who only surrendered because he had nothing left to fight with.
October 1st, Sunday. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, gives his first radio broadcast of the war. It's a review of the first month, what has happened, what Britain faces, what it can expect from the various powers arrayed around Europe. Most of the speech is measured and serious, but there is one passage that has echoed throughout history ever since, and it comes when Churchill tries to explain what the Soviet Union is doing and why it is impossible to predict.
He says, "I cannot forecast to you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. But perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest." That phrase, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, becomes one of the most quoted lines Churchill ever produced. He is trying to explain to the British public why the Soviet Union, which has just invaded Poland alongside Germany, is not necessarily a permanent enemy. He argues that Russia's national interest will ultimately lead it to resist German expansion eastward. He is right, though it will take nearly 2 more years to prove it.
The speech also marks October 1st as the day that the RAF flew from Berlin for the first time in the war, not to bomb it, but to drop leaflets. 4 British bombers reach Berlin and drop pamphlets detailing the overseas financial holdings of senior Nazi leaders. 1 aircraft doesn't make it back. 6 crews are lost. The RAF is expending lives over Berlin to deliver propaganda that the German government simply sweeps up and just throws away. The gap between the effort and the impact is quite unfortunate.
Also arriving in Paris on October 1st is something that matters enormously for the long arc of the war. Polish cryptologists, the mathematicians who had been working on cracking the German Enigma code machine, arrived to resume their work. We mentioned their flight from Poland in episode 5. They have now arrived with their knowledge, their methods, and physical machines at the doorstep of Allied intelligence. The work that flows from this will eventually be done at Bletchley Park in England, and it will arguably shorten the war by years. These cryptologists escaping a collapsing country contain some of the most important secrets of the 20th century. Now, let's step back from Europe for a moment, because something called commerce raiding is happening on the other side of the Atlantic. On September 30th, off the coast of Brazil, roughly 200 miles east of Recife, Brazil's major northeastern port city, a German warship called the Admiral Graf Spee intercepts and sinks a British cargo ship called the SS Clement.
The Graf Spee is what Germans call a pocket battleship, a heavy armed warship designed specifically to raid Allied shipping lanes. It has the firepower to destroy any merchant ship it encounters, and enough speed to outrun most warships that could destroy it. It has been positioned in the South Atlantic before the war began, just waiting, and now it has its orders: hunt Allied merchant shipping. The sinking of the Clement is the first kill, and it will not be the last.
The problem for the Allies is finding it. The Graf Spee is operating in the South Atlantic, a body of water roughly the size of the entire United States. Britain and France immediately form up to 8 hunting groups at various points in this hunt, deploying 3 capital ships, 4 carriers, and 16 cruisers across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans to find her. The Graf Spee's captain, Hans Langsdorff, is a skilled and unusually for this war humane commander. His standing orders are to sink ships, not kill their crews. After the Clement goes down, Langsdorff ensures the crew gets away safely. This hunt is going to run for months, and it will have a remarkable ending. We'll follow it as we go.
There is also a pocket battleship called the Deutschland operating in the North Atlantic at this time, though she is less successful. She encounters 2 ships before being ordered home in October. When she returns to Germany, she is renamed Lützow. Now, there is a reason for the name change. Hitler decides that it would be catastrophically bad propaganda if a ship called Deutschland were ever sunk by the enemy. I would agree with him on that one.
October 1st brings a single line in the notes that deserves more than a single line. The German euthanasia program begins. This is the systematic killing of people with disabilities, mental illness, and hereditary conditions, what the Nazi regime calls life unworthy of life. The program, known internally as Aktion T4, will kill an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people before it is officially halted in 1941. But even then, it continues unofficially after that. It is the direct precursor to the Holocaust in both its methods, gas chambers are first used here, and its logic. It is authorized on October 1st, 1939, while the world is watching Poland.
On October 4th, Hitler signs a secret decree granting amnesty for all crimes committed by German military and police personnel in Poland between September 1st and October 4th. The decree describes the massacres, the executions, the atrocities against civilians, and justifies them as what he called natural responses to atrocities committed by the Poles. It erases legal accountability for 35 days of documented mass murder before any reckoning can begin. The document exists, and it was signed. It tells you that the people who committed those crimes knew that they were crimes. They knew that their leadership knew, and the decision was made at the highest level to make them disappear on paper.
Also, on October 4th, something that sounds almost absurd in context, reports reached the United States, reportedly originating from the head of the German Navy, Erich Raeder, warning of a possible plot by the British to sink the American passenger liner SS Iroquois, carrying 566 American passengers from Ireland toward home, and blame it on Germany to turn the American public against the Germans. According to the warning, the ship might be attacked using tactics similar to those used in the sinking of the SS Athenia by U-boats, the first civilian liner sunk in the war. How credible this information was is unclear. Roosevelt nevertheless responds by sending Coast Guard and Navy ships to escort the Iroquois home. The plot, if it existed, comes to nothing. Although interestingly, the SS Iroquois would later be known as the USS Solace, and it would be present in Pearl Harbor over 2 years later as a hospital ship, and staff aboard her would witness the bombing of the USS Arizona. This is kind of a full circle history moment here.
Meanwhile, the Soviet Union is continuing its methodical pressure on the Baltic states. Estonia has already signed. On October 5th, Latvia signs a mutual assistance treaty with the Soviet Union, giving the Red Navy Sea and air bases on Latvian territory. That's the southeast coast of the Baltic Sea, sandwiched between Estonia to the north and Lithuania to the south, about the size of West Virginia. On that same day, Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov invites Finland to send representatives to Moscow to discuss what he called concrete political issues. Finland is the next country in line, and the Winter War is about 7 weeks away.
Japan, meanwhile, is making a quiet but significant pivot. Following the defeat at Khalkhin Gol, where the Soviet army under Zhukov destroyed an entire Japanese army in Mongolia in August, the senior officers of Japan's Kwantung Army are dismissed in disgrace. The faction within Japan's military that had favored pushing north into Soviet territory is weakened. The faction that favors pushing south into the Pacific and Southeast Asia, where American and British interests lie, is strengthened. The decision that eventually leads to Pearl Harbor is not made this week, but the conditions for it shift quietly in October 1939.
October 5th, Thursday. Hitler flies to Warsaw and holds a victory parade. German troops march through the shattered capital. The city has been bombed, shelled, burned, and starved for 27 days. Its streets are still full of rubble. Its buildings are still smoking in places. The city hall is a ruin. The cathedral is damaged. The art gallery is gone. And through all of it, German troops march in formation while Hitler stands on a reviewing platform and takes the salute.
His escort officer for this visit is a colonel named Erwin Rommel, a name worth remembering. Also at the parade, and not coincidentally, is a film crew. The footage is intended for German newsreels, the triumph of German arms, the fall of the Polish capital, and the Führer walking through his conquest. The German people are to see Warsaw not as a city that held out for 27 days against everything Germany had, but as a swift and glorious victory. The propaganda doesn't lie so much as it omits the full story.
There's one detail about that day that we kept coming back to. After the parade, the German High Command holds a celebratory banquet in a large tent on the airfield outside Warsaw, because Warsaw itself is too unsafe, and guerrilla bands are reportedly still operating nearby. The tent is full of champagne, and as one account describes it, mountains of stolen delicacies heaped on horseshoe tables. Hitler arrives, sees the lavish spread, and turns away. He makes a comment about eating with his troops rather than at banquets. He walks out to a field kitchen and has a bowl of soup.
The man who organized that banquet was General Blaskowitz, the same general who received Warsaw's surrender, allowed the Polish officers to keep their swords, and promised decent treatment for prisoners. He prepared a celebratory feast in good faith, and was publicly embarrassed for it by the man he served, Hitler, who ordered the bombing of hospitals, the shelling of cathedrals, and the massacre of civilians, made a theatrical show of refusing to eat stolen food. It is quite the performance.
As mentioned last episode, the Polish government-in-exile is formally constituted in Paris, and it continues to gain new members. Under President Władysław Rakiewicz and Prime Minister General Władysław Sikorski, it represents the legal continuity of the Polish state. Polish forces that escaped through Romania, through Hungary, across the Baltic, they are beginning to gather under its authority in France and Britain. Poland's army is not finished, it has just relocated. Over the course of the war, Polish forces will fight in Norway, North Africa, Italy, France, and the skies over Britain. That story begins right here at a Paris office on September 30th.
Elsewhere, this week, in small moments, the first American college football game is broadcast on television. NBC puts a Fordham versus Waynesburg game on its experimental TV station in New York on September 30th. And in a Connecticut airfield on October 1st, a prototype fighter called the Vought Corsair completes a test flight at 405 miles per hour. The first single-engine American fighter to break 400 miles per hour. That plane will eventually become one of the most feared naval fighters of the Pacific War. On October 5th, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill speak on the telephone for the first time. Roosevelt initiates this call.
The Polish September campaign is over. 35 days. Germany and the Soviet Union between them have killed or captured the entire Polish military, destroyed the capital, and divided the country. The cost was roughly 70,000 Polish soldiers dead, 133,000 wounded, nearly 700,000 taken prisoner by Germany, and more than 230,000 taken by the Soviet Union. Civilian casualties are in the tens of thousands, with more to come under occupation. And the German bill was only about 16,000 killed and 32,000 wounded. The asymmetry is just staggering here.
But Poland is not gone. Its government sits in Paris. Many Polish soldiers escaped to the Baltics, Romania, and Hungary, and are now reconstituting. Poland's pilots are flying for the RAF. Its cryptologists have delivered their Enigma machines and intelligence to the Allies. Its resistance movement, founded on the day Warsaw fell, is organizing in the rubble. The Battle of Kotsk ended on October 5th, with Polish soldiers tactically winning their last engagement before surrendering. Next episode, we move into October and the strange suspended world of the phony war. It goes quiet on the Western Front, and everyone begins waiting for what comes next.
Well, Justin, what do you think about that episode?
Well, looking forward, I really want to jump into the phony war, because before starting this, I really thought that the phony war was just that for roughly 8 months, nothing happened. But in the research for this show, a lot happens in the phony war. So looking forward, I think that you should be prepared for some wild episodes, despite the name Phony War. But that's all for this one. Thanks for joining us for episode 7 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then.